Hello and welcome to another edition of NYBJ Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait, and with me is...
I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you, Eric.
Hey, Bob. Another edition. This is Media Watch brought to you by EVT Educational Productions in association with the New York Association of Black Journalists and with the decent, very generous auspices of Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
Yes.
So, Bob, we air on Mondays, 5:30. By the time this airs, there'll be a lot of things in the news.
Right.
But,
people will still be working off their Thanksgiving turkey at that point.
That's
They'll
true.
still be working through leftovers.
Some of the stories that are breaking now, which still will be kicking around, we might as well start locally and then spread out nationally to internationally.
Right.
One of our constant stories that we deal with all the time had a new twist last week when the Federal Appeals Court ruled that the Bloomberg administration's request that Judge Shira Scheindlin's verdict on the stop-and-frisk case that was brought against the New York Police Department and the City of New York not be vacated. The judge basically ruled, Bob, that the NYPD New York City had to go through the normal...
They had to go through the normal process, which would push the next hearing basically into the next administration, into next year.
So to recap, the judge had ruled that stop and frisk basically was violating the constitutional rights of the black and brown individuals that were primarily being stopped. The Bloomberg administration filed an appeal, and in the course of adding to that appeal, they actually put out another legal maneuver asking that the federal appeals branch just totally vacate the ruling that the judge had made regarding the unconstitutionality of those stop and frisks. So
the appeals court basically said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to vacate the ruling. It holds as is, and the process will continue.
Meaning the city's appeal will have to take its normal course for another ruling on whether or not the judge's ruling was correct. Mm-hmm. Now, we know, basically, most New Yorkers, that the incoming administration, Mayor-elect Bill de Blasio, has stated point blank that he planned to definitely reform and take another look at stop and frisk. So the odds are, what do you say the odds are of that appeal going forward?
Basically, if I can give a negative number, I'd give one. I mean, it's so de Blasio has already said it's not. They're not even going to touch that. It will be.
So in essence,
the appeal will be thrown out. The city won't move ahead with it, and nothing further will happen on that issue.
Well, we hope.
I mean, not from the de Blasio administration,
not from
right?
the Blasio
From other sources, sure.
That's true.
There are other. Anyone can walk into federal court and put in a motion
and do it. Yeah, we've been known to get surprises in the judicial system in this country. So
I'll agree with that.
So, but you were pointing out another sort of proliferation of stop and frisk or just profiling that was taking place in a town somewhere in Florida. What was that story about?
It broke last Friday. The Miami Herald had actually a pretty good story on Miami Gardens. That's what it was. Miami
Gardens. That's the name of the town.
Right. It's actually the third largest municipality in Miami-Dade
county of Miami. Oh wow.
Yes.
That means it's not that small.
No, 109,000 people. And and it's only been incorporated for about 10 years. But the story down there is that there's a convenience store where police have arrested the same man over the last few years 60 times for trespassing at this convenience store.
Just trespassing. How many times has he been arrested?
He's been arrested more than 250 times over the last. I think it was the last 8 years. And so he has a long rap sheet, but...
It's based on these arrests?
Based on these arrests. I mean, the worst crime that he was actually convicted of is marijuana possession. God knows we have lots of people who get ticketed for that. Could have been, yes. So we're not dealing with any type of violent criminal or anything like that, or criminality anything at all.
And the bulk of those arrests took place right in this same
Right in
little
this
area, this convenience store?
Right. I believe they call it the 207th Street Convenience Outlet, something like that.
Okay.
But the thing with the story is this one man, Mr. Sampson, repeatedly arrested in this store for trespassing. Many of the charges are for trespassing for a store where he works. He works in the store, and he's been arrested multiple times for trespassing. The owner of the store basically got sick of this, and he set up 15 video cameras not to catch shoplifters, but to document what the police had been doing. And the Miami Herald and the Miami TV station since have shown the video of police arresting this employee after he takes out the trash. He comes back in, he's arrested. He's filling up the coolers with soda. He turns around, there's a cop, he's arrested. And it's been going on like this, on and on. So in a couple days after we air this, the store owner is scheduled to file a federal lawsuit
Against the police department
the
of
Miami Gardens
Miami
Police
Gardens.
Department for improper arrest, civil rights violations, improper search, and in some cases seizure. They were filmed poking around without a warrant behind the counter. Multiple video recorded issues here. No charge, obviously no charges yet since nothing is filed yet, but a serious case of police abuse with lots of video evidence backing it up.
And primarily, we could actually not be going out on a limb if we wanted to allege that it's racial profiling, because this gentleman is African American.
The gentleman is African American.
The police department for Miami Gardens, based on what we were discussing earlier, is predominantly white
and Hispanic.
And the bulk of the population of Miami Gardens is primarily African American or Hispanic,
and low income.
Okay.
At least, and it does have a very high crime rate. It actually does have a crime problem, so that's not an issue here. But
one convenience store, 268 arrests, one guy. I don't think they're looking very hard to combat their crime.
And we have a news story today. The day we film it, they actually found a police officer willing to speak, not on the record. He wouldn't give his name, but that's his concern. All of these arrests at this convenience store and not enough attention paid to the murders and the other felonies happening in the city.
You remember, as we've been doing this racial profiling, stop and frisk, walking while black, whatever we call it, the nature of the beast is, I always hark back to when we were talking about when we did Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home. Because when we're talking about the black codes that were passed in colonial times in this country, folk, it was primarily as a means of social control. They passed laws that were designed to impact on the communities of color that were enslaved, which always ended up impacting on the freed people of color as well, because the laws basically stated no blacks or Negroes or people could congregate in more than three, and they couldn't do anything at night, and they had to carry a lantern, and it all boils down to trying to make these people feel less than citizens, more like chattel, more like property, and social control. Basically, they're trying to control the population using unconstitutional means. Now, in colonial times, there was no constitution, but guess what? We're no longer in colonial times.
Right. But it's interesting that you bring up the historical aspects, because I've done a little bit of reading about the Miami Gardens area, and apparently it used to be one of those areas where there was a lot of restrictive covenants on real estate, where African Americans weren't allowed to own here or there. And of course, over the years, through legal challenges or through just expiring, those covenants are gone, but that history is still right there, and apparently some of the smell of it is still being some of the attitudes, I should say, incorporated in that is still here.
Yeah, the social control aspect to it harks back to the trying to make individuals less than, not citizen, less than human, which deals with how you can basically try to tell yourself that you're a practicing Christian, but you can hold another human being in a lower than status,
Right.
even if they're supposedly professing the same religion as you are and worshiping the same God as you are, but because their skin color is different, they're not quite human. So
It sort of gives you it does supposedly give you the means for justifying the
Yes.
differences.
Yes.
And
So the history of trying to treat people of color as inferior beings and using the law as a mechanism to do that is long entrenched in
Right.
this society.
right, this is
And
nothing new.
So
As
stop and frisk, walking while black, driving while black,
and
or
apparently,
racial profiling,
and apparently working while black.
working while black.
That seems to be an issue here as well.
It's endemic to the history of the society that we have watched evolve from colonial times to today. So that kind of, I mean, it gets me to why I feel that a lot of the opposition that this current president, Barack Obama, is facing, and we just went from local to
Right.
a national extraction
Yes.
of the stop and frisk that proliferates out of New York. But since New York was the highest profile stop and frisk city in the nation,
Right.
other people can say, oh, it works for them, let's try it too. Even though it's been proven statistically that it's a very unsound policing
It's
practice.
terribly inefficient.
Very inefficient. But it goes to that same less than, and I'm tying this in because as this airs, you're talking about the previous week when the Senate decided to blow up the filibuster rule, at least for judicial nominations, except the Supreme Court justices, because the Democrats finally got tired of obstructionism on the part of Republicans regarding the nominations for filling judicial seats by this particular president. Now, tell me a little bit about Elizabeth Warren's Senate speech when she basically lit into the body for how many filibusters had taken.
Well, you had the stats. The statistics were just absolutely astounding when you look at the number of filibusters over
the history of the country. Right.
And then you compare it to the number.
Right.
And
basically, it was like 160 something filibusters for the entire history of the country. And when Warren and other folks started to break it down, it turns out that the first half of those 168 plus filibusters took place prior to Barack Obama's term in office.
So in other words, for the first 220 something years of the country,
they had 80-something filibusters. And then
But
Barack Obama got elected, they had 80-something filibusters within his term of office. Now, Warren on a Senate floor just lambasted the Senate for basically trying to nullify two presidential elections. And she just flat out said
it was,
that it was basically a tactic to try to make this president not be president. They were obstructing his ability to fulfill his role as leader of the country, of the executive branch, by throwing as many roadblocks in his way as possible. And if we sat here and said that as, quote, judges of the media, we'd be accused of being one-sided. But this is one of the elected senators themselves who said this is pure obstructionism.
Because she could see it. I mean, at every point, at every possible appointment, there was delay, filibuster, delay. I mean, you couldn't conduct the business of the Congress, at least for the judicial appointments.
Right. Of course, the big story that's going to still be with you is the Affordable Care Act. And heard, not just the Senate, if you look at the House, I believe 43 or maybe 53 times they have voted to rescind the Affordable Care Act after it was voted into law. I don't know how many times after the U.S. Supreme Court actually upheld it as constitutional, but since that ruling, they've had a number of votes to repeal it. So I'm just saying, if you look at the data, what Warren charged about obstructionism and trying their best to see that this country doesn't run properly or smoothly seems to be what the game plan has been by the opposition party that didn't win the White House.
It doesn't stop the train, but it sure does. It definitely slows it down. At every point, there's a log thrown on the tracks. There's a block put up here. The speech was astounding when you listen to the statistics that she mentioned.
Yeah.
And like you said, the number of attempts to rescind the Affordable Care Act makes for good press locally. At least they can tell their constituents, well, I tried. But of course, all it does is delay the business of the of the
they're
House.
wasting good
There
U.S.
are other
taxpayer
issues.
dollars' time instead of taking up serious bills and other acts that could be passed for the benefit of the country. They're wasting time trying to roll back something that's already been made law and been actually upheld as constitutional.
And since we have about 11 minutes left,
But to segue on that whole obstructionism thing and this Affordable Care Act, the other big story that will still be noised about when we go to air is an amazingly successful breakthrough in foreign policy and foreign relations, in that John Kerry and his cohorts in the gang of whatever, 6 that was trying to come together to form some sort of agreement with Iran about their nuclear program actually succeeded in getting an agreement for a 6-month period to try to work out a way to stop the Iranians from continuing to try to develop a nuclear weapon.
and this is a monumental breakthrough. The president doesn't interrupt what's airing on a Saturday night to break passive news.
We have not had any kind of diplomatic relations with Iran for 30-some-odd years. All these previous administrations have been trying and stating that they do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. It's going to be destabilizing, etc. Nobody's been able to do much about stopping what's been going on. So the fact that they were able to get them to come to the table to sit down to talk about it, that was pretty phenomenal. As a longtime foreign assignment editor who tries to stay on top of a lot of international relations.
So you've dealt with a lot of secretaries of state.
I've seen a lot of game players. I've seen a lot of Middle East negotiations, and this is a very ticklish situation that they're dealing with, because we know that Iran's trying to get a bomb. The Israelis know Iran's trying to get a bomb. The Saudis know Iran's trying to get a bomb. Saudis do not want Iran with a bomb because that gives Iran some serious big footprint in that area. The Israelis don't want that bomb because they already have a bomb. They're trying to be the only nuclear power in that particular area. They don't admit they have a bomb, but we all know they have a bomb. So Kerry, President Obama, Secretary of State John Kerry and President Obama, they have to walk this serious tightrope about how do they backpedal Iran to get away from that enrichment stage where they can get this bomb, and at the same time keep the Israelis from blowing up the negotiations that might actually produce a possible successful negotiation 6 months down the road, and at the same time keep the Saudis pacified about not jumping the gun.
Absolutely is not an easy thing. The fact that even this I don't know how long this agreement will last. We'll see how long see if it gels, and that's a major issue. But the fact that he's gotten this far, Secretary of State Kerry,
it may blow up in the next 6 months.
Right.
And one of the things that might cause it to blow up, folk, is we've got congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, saying, no, we need to hit the Iranians with more sanctions, and that's what's going to be most effective. Well, actually, yeah, I agree. I believe the sanctions got the Iranians
to the table. Absolutely.
But now that they're at the table,
yes,
adding more sanctions might blow them away from the table, and we might not get any success.
I mean, just by coming this far, enough has been loosened up in their financial system so that all of a sudden their economy is picking up. Now, a lot of leaders locally are going to have something to say about not wanting to go back to the total economic shutdown that they've been suffering through. Yeah. So that's the game.
Yeah, it's a really tight game. It's a real tightrope. But at least the Obama administration, Secretary of State Kerry, and some of the Europeans are willing to walk that tightrope because they think that's the best.
It's worth the effort. There's no issue there.
But guess what? The bulk of the Republicans were saying right after the announcement was made about this breakthrough. Mitch McConnell's minority leader in the Senate, another ploy by this administration just to take everybody's attention away from the Affordable Care Obamacare Act. A ploy to take the American public's attention away from the Affordable.
I had heard that statement, and once again, it's one of those statements that sort of sets you back and makes and it's like, no, he didn't really. Yeah, he really didn't drag that issue into this one.
He made the Affordable Care Act a game chip in this breakthrough in foreign relations.
I could not believe that.
These people they amaze me sometimes. I'm trying to figure out, are they really politically savvy individuals who have the best interests of this country at heart? Or are they just charlatan politicians who just want power? I can't figure this out.
And who are terribly frustrated at the moment that they don't have enough of it it's not their administration, and they don't want to give credit to the other side. And so it becomes an issue, but it's incredible at the very point where you expect things to come together and gel, a little bit of cooperation. It's proven again. No, we're going to play the political game. We're going to play the chip anyway, whether you like it or not.
I'm going to go with Elizabeth Warren when she said, "Enough of this nonsense. These people need to stop trying to derail this president so he can be successful." I go back to when this guy Joe, whatever his name is, from South Carolina, screamed "You lie" at this president during a State of the Union address.
Was that the first one?
I believe
his very first.
I'm not sure which.
It might have been the second.
It may have been the second, but I know I was livid because if I could shake Richard Nixon's hand, and that's a president that I really did not respect, but because he was president, actually I've grown in respect for Richard Nixon because I think he did what he did out of what he thought was the best interest of this country, and I can't quite say the same for some of these other people. All right?
See, I can say that about Bob Dole because I've met him, and for all of the things I disagree with him on,
I like Dole.
He convinced me that he had the best interest of the country.
Dole always had the best interest.
He was a big crab. He's a crabby personality.
Yeah, but he had the best interest.
He made me believe that. Yes,
I sincerely believe that. Some of these people, Cheney, Rumsfeld,
yes.
The second Bush, the first Bush had the country's interest at heart.
I actually have a lot more respect for him since his son was president.
Yeah,
the first
Bush. Yeah, and I got lots of bones to pick with Barack Obama, this president.
So do I.
A lot of stuff he's doing. I can't even begin to tell you about these drones. That'll be another show. We've done it in the past. We'll do it again.
Right.
But the stuff that he's trying to do that's good and right for and by the country, it's ridiculous to watch people try to torpedo it. But it goes back to, I'm running out of time, but it goes back for me, because then I'll be free to travel home. That's a historical documentary that we did on the battle for freedom and first-class citizenship in this country by African Americans.
As we have about 3 minutes left.
Enslaved Africans.
But go ahead.
And in the course of that historical arc, which I picked up in Every Voice and Sing, another 5-part radio documentary series that dealt with that, what was made abundantly clear in the history is that the Africans that were enslaved and the free Africans that came here were always relegated to second-class citizens. And even when they got elected to public office, they were still faced with a double standard. To the point where during Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction, there was even, I think it was Wilmington, North Carolina, where the city government that got elected was primarily African Americans. And guess what? There was a serious gun-toting, gun-shooting riot in Wilmington, and the white population actually took guns and threatened and probably tried to kill these people, ran them out of office physically, even though they had been legally and lawfully elected. All right. So I'm looking at the same kind of treatment by these other elected officials for this current president, and the battle to be upright first-class citizens that's been fought by the African Americans and other people of color in this country is just the kind of struggle that needs the kind of telling properly. I'm segueing to some of the things that are on the media right now. 12 Years a Slave actually gives you that period in the life of one man who was free, who was enslaved, and it tells it with true accuracy.
I'll try to see it before next week, because we have about a minute left.
Yeah, you've got to see that. The retelling of the American history through the eyes of African Americans that Professor Gates is doing right now on PBS is, I don't want to say the most abominable, but it's just so lacking.
I'll use the word cursory.
Cursory is charitable.
Okay.
but folk, look, go to www.evted.org, download that first episode. That's all free, and then we'll talk some more on another show.
We have about 20 seconds.
Yeah,
so
this has been
go ahead.
Media Watch. I'm Eric Tait.
And I'm Bob Anthony. We'll have a lot more of discussion on 12 Years a Slave and a few other issues.
Many rivers to cross, the African Americans. We need to dissect that properly for you folks because we're out of time.